She made him one bowl of soup, and it healed his whole life. The first taste hit his tongue like a memory. Spicy, earthy, warm, slightly sweet at the end. It wasn't just soup. It was comfort. It was truth. He blinked. Then he took another spoonful. And another. By the time the bowl was empty, he'd forgotten he was in a shop he once thought beneath him. He looked up at and behind the counter. That was... He started, unsure how to finish the sentence. She smiled knowingly. More? He nodded without hesitation. Yeah. Please. Dark clouds rolled over the city like a thick, angry blanket. Thunder growled in the distance, and rain slapped against windshields with the fury of 1,000 tiny fists. Most people had already run for cover, but not Anne, and never left her post. Inside the dimly lit shop on the corner, Granny's soup pot, the windows fogged up with warmth. The rich smell of simmering oxtail broth and fresh herbs spilled out through a cracked window pane, cutting through the cold like a comforting hand on the back. Anne stood behind the counter, apron dusted with flour, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She stirred the pot slowly, deliberately, like she was coaxing something sacred to life. This batch is for Mama, she whispered, letting the wooden spoon tap the edge of the pot. The old radio on the shelf played faint jazz as the door creaked open and a young man stepped in, dripping with rain. Same as yesterday, Miss Anne, he said, breathless. That pepper soup healed my chest. Anne laughed, rich and warm like her broth. You sure it wasn't just your guilty conscience? She teased, already reaching for a bowl. Outside, barely a block away, Larry Benton sat stiffly behind the wheel of a sleek black Mercedes. His brow was furrowed. His knuckles white around the steering wheel. Damn it, he muttered, hitting the dashboard. Not today. The car was dead. Completely. Hazard lights blinked in protest as water streamed down the windows. The rain had turned the street into a murky stream, and his suit, pressed just this morning, was now sticking to his skin. Larry was a man used to control. He ran multi-million-dollar campaigns, negotiated contracts with icy confidence, and rarely needed help from anyone. But right now, he was helpless. Cold. Hungry. Alone in a part of the city he had never bothered to notice before. He called road assistance an hour ago. Still nothing. With a frustrated sigh, he leaned back in his seat, then froze. Something caught his eye. Through the foggy side window, he noticed two women running out of a narrow alley, giggling, shielding white takeaway bags from the rain like treasure. A few minutes later, another man came, face glowing, holding a similar paper bag close to his chest. What the hell? Larry mumbled, watching them disappear into waiting taxis. Curious, he turned off the engine and stepped out. The rain hit him like a slap, but he ignored it, following the stream of people toward the alley. There, tucked between a cracked brick wall and a graffiti-covered dumpster, was a tiny wooden sign. Granny's soup pot. The scent hit him before he even reached the door, spicy, warm, slightly sweet, like something out of a childhood dream he didn't remember having. He paused. It wasn't the kind of place he'd normally go into. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't on Yelp. It didn't scream executive lunch. But something about it, maybe the glowing warmth through the foggy glass, maybe the laughter spilling from inside, pulled him in. Larry pushed the door open. A small bell chimed. And just like that, his world shifted. As Larry stood in the doorway, he glanced up at the hand-painted sign above the entrance, Granny's soup pot. Figures, he muttered under his breath. Some sweet old lady with a ladle and a rocking chair. But when his eyes scanned the room, he stopped cold. Behind the counter stood a young woman, no older than 27, with warm brown skin and eyes like still water, calm, deep, quietly powerful. Her apron was stained with broth and spices, and the steam rising behind her curled around her like a halo. She didn't match the mental picture he'd formed, not even close. For a moment, Larry just stared. Something in the room tugged at him, not just the aroma of the food, but the walls covered in black and white photos, the lace curtain barely holding back the rain, the soft jazz playing from a crackling speaker. It felt like home. A place he hadn't dared think about in years. Before he could make sense of it, the woman stepped out from behind the counter with a soft smile. "What would you like, sir?" she asked, her voice kind but clear. Larry cleared his throat. He wasn't the type to eat in places like this, places with squeaky floors, handwritten menus, and chipped mugs. He dined at high-rise restaurants with polished floors and signature cocktails. This place wasn't even on the map. Still, his stomach growled loudly. His soaked shirt clung to his chest, and the cold had begun to set into his bones. He sighed. "I just need anything hot and spicy." The woman nodded with no judgment in her eyes. "Coming right up, sir." She turned and walked back to the counter. Her movements were gentle but sure, like she knew exactly what he needed, not just in flavor, but in soul. Larry shuffled to a small corner table. The wooden chair creaked beneath him, but the warmth from the kitchen had started to reach his fingers. He looked around, at the faded wallpaper, the mismatched chairs, the photo of an elderly woman stirring a pot with laughter in her eyes. His jaw tightened. A flash of memory struck him. His mother in a faded yellow dress, humming as she stirred soup in their tiny kitchen back in Stillwater, Missouri. The way she'd taste the broth with a wooden spoon and say, "Almost there, baby," with that same smile he just saw on the girl behind the counter. He hadn't been home in, 7 years? Maybe more. No calls. No visits. Just work. Hustle. Deals. Silence. Now here he was, wet, hungry, and sitting in a soup shop run by a stranger who somehow reminded him of everything he had buried under ambition. He glanced toward the door. He could still leave. Maybe this was a mistake. A detour. He didn't belong here. But then the scent hit him. Rich, peppery, and deep. And for the first time in a long time, he stayed. The warmth in the shop seeped into his bones. Not just from the heater tucked in the corner, but from the very air, thick with the scent of spices and slow-cooked stories. When and gently placed the bowl of soup on the table in front of him, Larry looked down at it skeptically. The broth was a rich, reddish-brown, steam curling up like smoke from a fire that had been burning for hours. There were chunks of tender meat, soft plantains, a scattering of green herbs on top, and flecks of oil that shimmered like gold in the light. She even cared about plating, he noticed. It wasn't fancy, but it was thoughtful. Real. He took the spoon, dipped it into the bowl, and lifted it to his lips. The first taste hit his tongue like a memory. Spicy. Earthy. Warm. Slightly sweet at the end. It wasn't just soup. It was comfort. It was truth. He blinked. Then he took another spoonful. And another. By the time the bowl was empty, he'd forgotten he was in a shop he once thought beneath him. He looked up at and behind the counter. That was... He started, unsure how to finish the sentence. She smiled knowingly. More? He nodded without hesitation. Yeah. Please. The second bowl disappeared faster than the first. By the third, Larry was laughing with a retired mechanic named Joe, and a nurse who swore by the okra stew. Try it with the ginger beer, Joe said, sliding a cold glass across the table. She makes that too. Keeps the fire balanced. Larry took a sip. It was sharp, cold, and just sweet enough. He chuckled and wiped his mouth with a napkin. This place is dangerous, he said with a grin. No, the nurse replied, smiling. This place is honest. For the first time in what felt like years, Larry wasn't checking his watch. He wasn't answering calls or mentally reviewing his to-do list. He was here. Fully. The fast life, the constant chase, the boardroom tension, the shallow handshakes melted away like the storm outside. All that remained was this moment. This table. This warmth. And somewhere, beneath the laughter and the clinking of spoons, the quiet ache in his chest softened. He remembered the feeling of home. Of porch lights. Of Sunday soups. Of his mother's voice calling from the kitchen. It's the moments that count, baby, she used to say. The little ones, they make a life. And now, here in this little soup shop run by a stranger with kind eyes and magic hands, Larry Benton felt something he hadn't in years. He found. The clock above the counter ticked softly. The storm had passed, leaving behind a slick, glistening street that reflected the faded glow of the lamppost outside. One by one, the customers trickled out, their bellies full and spirits lifted. Some offered waves, others a nod of thanks, and one or two gave Larry a curious look. They'd never seen him before, but tonight, he had felt like one of them. Ann's only worker, a shy teenager named Maya, untied her apron and waved goodnight. You good, Miss Ann? Ann nodded. I'm good, baby. Get home safe. The bell chimed once more, then silence. Larry looked around. The shop was empty now, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator, the scent of broth still lingering in the air, and the two of them. Ann had wiped down the last table, but when she saw Larry still sitting there, sipping the last of his ginger beer, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat. Her apron was stained, her curls a little frizzy from the steam, but she looked peaceful, glowing in the quiet. Larry leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. So, he began, hesitating just a bit. This place. It's something else. And chuckled softly. You mean it's not a one-star dive like you thought when you walked in? Larry gave a guilty laugh and put his hands up. Okay, fair. I did judge the book by its very foggy, creaky cover. I figured, she said, smiling. Most people do. There was a short, comfortable pause. Then he asked quietly, how'd you start it? This place. It feels like it's got a soul. And looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. It started with my grandma, she said, voice gentle. She raised me in a small town called Eden Falls, barely even on the map. We didn't have much, but what we had, she made it stretch. Larry listened closely, his chest tightening a little. The name Eden Falls felt like a whisper of something he once knew. She had this gift, and continued. She didn't just cook food, she cooked moments. Meals that made people sit a little longer, talk a little softer, laugh a little louder. She'd always say, you feed the stomach, sure. But if you ain't feeding the heart too, you ain't done nothing. Larry smiled at that. She sounds like someone I would have loved to meet. And nodded, eyes shining. She passed 2 years ago. I left Eden Falls to come here with the last of my savings and that recipe box of hers. Everyone back home thought I was crazy. They said, why leave? Folks here love your food. But I didn't want her flavors to be locked up in one little town. I wanted the world to taste what love felt like in a bowl. She looked at him then, eyes searching. Does that make sense? Larry stared at her, his expression unreadable at first. Then he said quietly, "It makes more sense than anything I've heard in a long time." He looked down at his empty bowl, then back at her. "You know, my mom used to make soup like that. Back in Stillwater. I haven't been home in years." He paused. "I forgot what it felt like to just sit. To feel something again." Their eyes locked. In that small, humble soup shop, two very different lives had just begun to intertwine. Not because they were looking for something, but because something deep, warm, and quietly powerful had found them. Larry came again. And again. It started with the soup. Then it became the silence. Then the soft talks after closing, the shared laughter, the confessions whispered over ginger beer and late-night leftovers. Each visit, he stayed a little longer. Talked a little more. And slowly, something inside him began to thaw. Every time he sat in that tiny corner of Granny's soup pot, he felt less like the man who once chased boardroom deals and more like the boy who used to sit on his mother's back porch with a bowl of stew and dreams bigger than Stillwater. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long golden shadows across the kitchen, Larry stood by the doorway, watching him cook. She didn't know he was watching. She was in the zone, humming softly, gently tasting broth, adjusting spices like a composer fine-tuning her final symphony. He saw it then, not just her skill, but her dream. The love she poured into every stir. The quiet fire in her eyes that said, this was more than just food. This was a calling. She turned and caught him staring. "What?" She smiled, wiping her hands. Larry walked over slowly, then leaned on the counter beside her. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what you said that night, about wanting the world to taste what love feels like in a bowl." She tilted her head, curious. "Yeah?" He nodded. "I believe in it. And I believe in you." Anne's brows lifted. "Where's this going, Mr. Business Suit?" Larry smiled. "I want to partner with you. Not to change your food, not at all, but to help you grow it. Rebrand if needed. Get this out there. Stores. Trucks. Maybe even airports one day. Let people everywhere know what home tastes like." Anne blinked. "You serious?" "As serious as a man who's had 3 bowls of your soup every week for 2 months, he said, grinning. "I'll handle the operations. The management. You just keep being the soul." She hesitated. Then looked around her little shop, her grandmother's legacy, and back at him. "You won't try to turn this into some plastic chain with frozen ingredients and fake smiles?" "Never," he said. "We'll keep the heart. That's the brand." A long pause. Then she smiled, softly. "Okay, Larry. Let's cook the world a bowl of love." And so they did. With Larry's business mind and Anne's soulful fire, they began reimagining Granny's soup pot. They opened a second shop in a nearby neighborhood, then another. Each one served the same recipes and had once made in a tiny kitchen in Eden Falls. The same love. The same warmth. The same story, carried from town to town like a well-kept secret finally being shared. And everywhere they went, people sat down and stayed a little longer. Talked a little softer. Laughed a little louder. Just like Anne's grandma would have wanted. Wherever Granny's soup pot opened, hearts opened too. It wasn't just food. It was healing. And for Larry Benton, it was a journey that brought him full circle. Every city, every launch, every ribbon cutting, there was still something that tugged gently at him with each bowl he tasted. It was always in the first spoonful. The warmth, the spice, the soul. Something about that soup, no matter where it was served, made his chest tighten and his heart ache in a way he couldn't ignore anymore. He had built success. He had found peace. He had even found something like family again, working beside him day and night. But there was one thing he hadn't yet done. One door he hadn't knocked on. It was a quiet Saturday morning in Stillwater. The kind of morning where the air smells like soil and dew, and the wind carries stories. Larry stood in front of the weathered white porch of the home he hadn't seen in nearly a decade. His father's old truck was still parked in the yard, a little rustier now. There were wind chimes by the door, he remembered those. His mother used to say the sound kept her heart steady. With trembling fingers, he knocked. It took a few seconds, then the door creaked open. His mother stood there, hair streaked with more silver than he remembered, her eyes cautious until she truly saw him. "Larry?" He tried to speak, but the lump in his throat was too heavy. His father came up behind her, silent, staring. Larry croaked. "I came home." His mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father took one small step forward. And then they embraced. Right there on the porch, in a tangle of tears, years, and forgiveness. Later, over a pot of soup that Larry helped stir himself, using Anne's recipe, he sat with them at the old kitchen table, the same one he grew up around. He held their hands and said quietly, "I'm sorry I stayed away. I forgot what mattered. But I promise, I won't turn my back again." His mother squeezed his hand, eyes glassy. "It's okay, baby. You found your way back." And as he took another sip of the broth, rich, spicy, and deeply familiar, Larry Benton finally understood the full truth. It wasn't just soup. It was a bridge. A homecoming. A story in every bite. Who would have thought that all it would take to bring him back was a bowl of soup?